Thank you very much, Jerome, for being here, for doing this with us and for us. Also, thank you very much to Jenna, who's working with me on the Stanley Picker program. And last but not least, the Stanley Picker Trust, whose generous support makes these things possible in the first place. So with that, over to you, Jerome.
Thank you, Volker, very much. Thank you, Jenna. And thank you all for being here. I'm very happy to be here with you all and very grateful for the invitation. And I encourage anyone who wants to turn on their camera. I like seeing people, but of course, no, however you want, however you wish to be is perfect, of course. Hello, hello. I am calling in from Norfolk, Virginia, in the United States. And it is 11:07 in the morning, and the sun is shining, and it's a very windy day today. I think what I will do is I will present for about 25 minutes or so, and pause to open up to any questions that arise. And what I would really love to do is have a conversation with y'all. I love to think in that way and to explore different ideas in that way with others. So I will do that. So I encourage anyone to join into the conversation. And I will move. I will move as I often do, improvisationally, through what I want to talk about, which I think is just, I want to talk about a few kind of recent sites of research for me. I will begin with something from the clearing. Thank you, Volker, very much for your kind words about the clearing. As Volker said, and for those who are unfamiliar, the clearing is an album that came out in 2021, and it concerns intersections among stuttering, Blackness, and music, especially how in relationship with time. And as Volker said, then it was accompanied by a publication. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen and play a bit of the album. And so what you are seeing here is a view of the beginning of chapter 5 from the book, called Disfluent Waters. And in the book, each chapter corresponds to a track from the album, and each page corresponds to 1 minute from the album. And so it's in some ways a real-time transcription, but also score for the album. There are 2 kind of streams of text. Eventually there are 3, but in this chapter there are 2. This is chapter 5, track 5. There are texts in italics. And is this font large enough for folks? I'm gonna actually just make it a little bigger. Is this font large enough for folks? Able to read it? Yeah? Okay. So there's text in italics. This is a description of the music, a description of the sound. And then this Roman text is text that I'm speaking aloud. And part of what I explore in the clearing is how, as Volker said, how to translate the sonic experience of the album into a form of writing on the page, and including moments where I stutter on the album. I render in real time and try to make portraits of the stutter. So I'll start this track here.
How can thinking about water help us think about disfluencies, blacknesses, and musics together? The English language imagines speech as water. The words fluent and disfluent come from the Latin verb fluere, to flow. And the 16th century French theorist Guillaume Boucher wrote that people who live near rivers are more likely to stutter. What do we make of the sonic similarity between the Latin words balbus, stuttering, and babulus, fool or babbler? In the shadow of Babel, the babbling waters create my babbling body. Black thinkers from Olada Equiano to Christina Sharp observe that blacknesses are inseparable from the Atlantic and Indian oceans. We, following Sharp, are in the wake of the slave ships. The Amistad, the White Lion, Sepenchi Dumas, Postilion. Postilion left London on February 7, 1704 and arrived in Gambia on March 3rd. 100 slaves were purchased. Sometime during the ship's passage to Virginia, the ship's captain, John Tozer, supplied a, quote, drum and banisoon, close quote, for the captives in the hold. This was a common practice, as many slavers believed that having musical instruments on board made the middle passage easier for the captives. One day, Captain Tozer and his crew were performing their normal duties on the main deck, while down below, the Africans played the instruments loudly. The crew listened. As the Africans played, they used the music to muffle the sound of their breaking shackles. Several rose from the hold, attacked the crew, and injured 7 members. For Derek Walcott, quote, water has one tense and cannot run backwards. Close quote. For Toni Morrison, it has a perfect memory. She writes, quote, you know, they straightened out the Mississippi River in places to make room for houses and livable acreage. Occasionally, the river floods these places. Floods is the word they use, but in fact, it is not flooding. It is remembering. Remembering where it used to be. All water has a perfect memory and is forever trying to get back to where it was. Close quote. Is disfluency a form of perfect memory? Is the stream of my disfluent speech remembering where it used to be?
Okay, so I will stop the track there. Um, so one thing that one of the things that I has been an ongoing preoccupation in my work is how to respond to my experience throughout my life as someone who stutters, that the way that I usually stutter sometimes goes unrecognized or unheard. The way I stutter is sometimes called a glottal block, and as you heard on the album, it usually manifests as a form of silence, in quotes. And sometimes that silence, is I think interpreted as me thinking, or me unsure of what I need to say, or on the phone, it can be interpreted as a problem with the connection. So I have been curious about. I have been driven by a question that is perhaps one way of approaching it is like, how can music, and also how can writing help aid in a kind of listening? How can music help us hear in certain ways? And it's part of what is happening here is that I when I was approaching the book, I was like, well, there's a version where I just, I'm stuttering on the syllable GL for Edouard Huglissant's name, and I could have just left this space blank, and that is the way it sometimes, I think that is the way it sometimes sounds to someone that I'm speaking to, is that I go silent for a while. But another way of approaching it, and one that I felt that I was interested in, is in fact going in the opposite direction. Instead of a blank space, to fill that space with a kind of life. And this, this of course reflects more closely in some ways how it feels within me when I'm stuttering on the letter GL. All is not calm and quiet inside of me. And these J's and these D's and these birds, the J's become these birds that arise. And eventually there is a dandelion that my brother Kelvin drew, and an avalanche. Eventually there are these pools, these kind of radiating pools, and then rain, which becomes a tree made of stutters that my brother Kelvin also drew. I will not show the tree that I originally drew because it was very embarrassing, and I had to ask Kelvin for his help. And eventually the stutters become streams of blue, and eventually become a baptismal pool at the end of the book. And so much of this is, for me, is part of an ongoing, yes, as I said, preoccupation, exploration with showing what may go overlooked. There's an epigraph, One of the epigraphs for the clearing is from the political scientist James C. Scott, and he writes in his book Seeing Like a State, illegibility has been and remains a reliable source for political autonomy. And this to me feeds into these explorations of showing that which might be overlooked, but also questions around legibility and illegibility. The stutter to me often feels like an illegible manifestation of sound. And I have wanted to ask whether that illegibility itself holds, as Scott says, a form of, or a certain kind of invitation or access to a certain kind of autonomy. That I feel both that I want people, or I want it to be understood more what is happening when I am stuttering and when other people are stuttering. And I want it to be understood more how many, the great diversity of stuttering, that there are so many ways of stuttering. And at the same time, I also seek a kind of unknowability, illegibility, opacity, even fugitivity from certain forms of being recognized. There is there's this part right at the end of where we paused, where I quote Toni Morrison. She says, you know, they straightened out the Mississippi River in places to make room for houses and livable acreage. Occasionally, the river floods these places. Floods is the word they use, but in fact, it is not flooding. It is remembering. Remembering where it used to be. All water has a perfect memory and is forever trying to get back to where it was. And then I ask, is disfluency, and by disfluency, I'm referring to, you know, a whole spectrum of modes of speaking that are that might fall out of a certain kind of normativity, including stuttering. And I ask, is disfluency a form of perfect memory? Is the stream of my disfluent speech remembering where it used to be?